means that you're gonna hurt somebody. I mean, we're talking your family. We gotta give stuff up in order to bring people around the table and be willing to be advocates for those individuals who are suffering. We are challenged to be advocates for those who are suffering. I think that's how we begin to move the needle when it comes to diverse inclusion throughout our country.
Good day, everybody. This is another episode, a special episode of Walk Talk Listen, recorded live at the Ecumenical Advocacy Days 2024 in Washington, D.C., during which we explored the intersection of the Black church, racism, and immigration. It was moderated by myself, and the workshop featured an insightful panel with Dr. José Wilson. He is the Director of Facilitation and Organizational Learning of North Lawndale Employment Network. A colleague, Reverend Reuben Eckels, who is the Faith and Partnership Hub Coordinator of CWS, and another colleague, Reverend Noel Andersen, the National Field Director of CWS, as well as Amena Elamin, the National Youth Organizer of BAJI. So, our apologies in advance because the reflections from the audience at the end of this episode are not very clear. We still hope that you enjoy it.
Creating welcoming communities during difficult times. So I would like to, what I asked the panel to do also is answer a couple of questions, but really speak on the basis of their experience. I'd like them to share stories with us. What I'm asking you to do is really listen carefully to what is being said and try to listen without judgment. Okay, so I'm trying to create here an environment where, let us start on the premise that everyone's perspective is true but partial. Okay, so that's what I hope we will do. Okay, we are facing a huge crisis, and there are different crises. And some of the literature, they call it a body crisis. Other people would even go further and say, we are in the middle of an existential crisis. I really think that's important because, even for this topic, it's very easy to say, to look at this, in a black and white way, but everything is related. Everything is interconnected. We are all interconnected. And I think during COVID, maybe for 2 weeks, we all realized that we were all interconnected. And things were being said in terms of, we are all in the same boat, right? Well, I don't think we were in the same boat. I think we were in the same storm, but it was different boats. Yes. And so why do I say 2 weeks we felt that we were interconnected? Because after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, many of us around the world had suddenly access to the vaccine, and then we stopped caring about the rest of the world. My problem is solved, right? So interconnectedness is really important. The fact that there are different crises are going on, and it's really complicated to solve this. But again, I think we live in a world where when we look at television, we get all the pictures. Things are being projected to us as if they are simple, and it's nice to hear simple solutions because then you can deal with it, right? So my name is Maurice Bloem. I work for Church World Service, close to 25 years. I'm also our person responsible for our work at the UN. So I have worked for many years on sustainable development goals. 17 goals that look at, goal 1 is end poverty, goal 2 is end hunger. Are they perfect, those goals? Far from it. But why I'm always talking about those sustainable development goals is at least it was an attempt by the world to discuss together and to say, how can we make our world more sustainable, more just? So I think it's a good attempt. Unfortunately, those goals need to be reached before 2030. And if you look at those goals, we are maybe at 15% on average, right? So yeah, a lot of things are not going well. And a growing group of people around the world are saying, one of the reasons that we are not really reaching those goals, we're not making the progress that we need to make, has to do with those SDGs are looking at systems changes and process changes that need to happen. But if we don't pay proper attention to the ability, skills, and knowledge that you need as an individual and as a community, those system changes are not going to work. So this growing group of people did a survey and they came up with 5 inner development goals. Being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And when I saw that, I thought, wow, this is interesting. Being, thinking, relating, collaborating, acting. I think that is what faith-based organizations, people of faith, should be contributing, in making this world better, right? And why I'm also fascinated by it, because I think those inner development goals have the potential to bring secular populations together with faith-based organizations. A language, and that's often, you're speaking different languages, right? Very often these type of statements, I start with mijn naam is Maurice Bloem, ik kom uit Nederland, spreek in Nederland. Nobody's speaking Dutch. So, that will mean speak English, right? To make the point. But that's happening in the world. You're speaking different languages and you're not making any attempt to understand what the other is saying. Inner development goals. And when it's a little thing that I don't know, Noel, if you're familiar, and Reuben are familiar with my props that I always use, the ducky. So we want to see changes in the world. And there is a scene within the Sesame Street where Ernie, my favorite puppet, Ernie would like to learn how to play the saxophone. So, but he's always holding on to his ducky. So he makes all sweetie sounds. Then ultimately his teacher says, Ernie, if you really want to learn how to play the saxophone, you need to put your ducky down. So I really think all of us need to learn how to put our ducky down. Okay. So if you see ducky now, wherever you go, you think about, I have to put the ducky down.
Also thinking
That's a good spot. Okay, the third point I would like to share with you before we go to this great panel is, I have a podcast, so how do you say that? A terrible pitch for a commercial for my podcast, Walk, Talk, Listen, which I started during COVID. I talk with all people from all kinds of ways of life, and we talk about what drives you, etc. The president of Virtual Service I've interviewed jazz musicians and name. But what I realized when I was talking for an hour for this podcast, and I listened to the recording and I started to do the edits, I realized that I had not really listened to my guests. I was so occupied with my questions, and I was so occupied with, oh yeah, I know the answer to that. And that, when you talk about the inner development goals, those 5 goals, you are reminded that I used to have the 6-pack. Not anymore, I have a 1-pack, so not slowly, but 1-pack. So how do you get at least that 1-pack a little bit more, muscly? You need to do exercises, right? And I haven't done this for a week, you can see that. But if I do some exercises, sitting in a chair for 11 minutes, I feel after a week that I feel better. And that is also what we need to do with these inner development goals. And they have to do with prayer, listening, thinking, those type of things. Those are muscles within us that we continue to need to train. And that will help us in our work to try to change this. So I'm going to ask you before we go to the panel, for 15 seconds, be silent and say to yourself, okay, I'm here. I'm starting from the premise everybody's perspective is true, but partial. And I'm going to listen for this hour to everybody, especially the panelists, without judgment, and then we're going to start. Okay? Okay. Yeah, Jose, and Noel, Amena, and Reuben, we are not going through an extensive introduction. You quickly mentioned, where you are based at the moment and who you work for. So I'm going to take a question that I always ask again, to promote my own podcast. A question that I always ask to my guests, and that is, if I ask you to come up with a piece of music or a song that best embodies what you are about, can you please share that? So, Jose, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think that's first of all, let me just thank you for the way you level set and got us actually focused and centered for this opportunity to share and listen. And so for me, the song that best embodies me would be, and thank you for sending me that question, because I'm not sure what I would say it impromptu, but Fred Hammond's song, No Weapons. All right, I'm looking in the audience, and I'm trying to see some head nods, either yes, no, or no weapons formed against me. And so this is why, because as an African American male in the city of Chicago and actually living in the world, I also lived in Wichita, Kansas for a short time, where I met Reuben, and I've come to believe and understand that although they are systemic, you have systemic issues, you have policies that have been weaponized against people of color. And so the thing that actually pushed me forward and give me hope is my belief that no weapon formed against me shall prosper. And so as I infuse contact with community, I come with that same passion and belief that although things may be dim now, no weapon formed against us shall prosper.
Great. Thanks, Jose.
Yep.
Amena?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thank you for grounding us. I think of the song. Well, actually, I had a hard time thinking, and I was like, oh, hold up. Like, I know what song I'm gonna say. And It's a Change Is Gonna Come. It makes me think of Miriam Kaba's quote, Hope is a Discipline, which has become my own mantra when I'm in the thick of this work or just in general with my community. Because it's a practice to make a decision every day to be hopeful. And it'll in fact be a struggle because it's work to be hopeful, but we have to be really clear-eyed and hold fast to having a vision. That's not an easy thing to do. So that song really grounds me in that. And I'm just gonna put a bonus one in there really quickly, but I also think of songs of the People's Revolution that have come from the Sudanese Revolution. So my family is originally from Sudan, immigrated here before I was born. I'm first generation Sudanese, and so they've always made sure that our roots are near and dear to us. So I think of all the beautiful songs of hope and joy and liberation that have come out of like a really dark time. And yeah, I'll keep it at there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Amena. Reuben?
Again, good morning. The song that comes to mind, grew up in the 60s, and I grew up on James Brown. And James Brown's song was Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. And it was a song that made not just the world understand or see Blackness in a different way, but it made Black people begin to see Blackness in a different way, and that we were not evil, but we were powerful people. And so with that, I remember I joined the African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME Church, and part of that legacy is being a people who said we can make a whole denomination, we can make a our own self-help group, we can make a place where we are as they said, as Amena said, hopeful people, that we can love our neighbor as ourselves, but we also make sure we first and foremost that we love us. And because we have been at so many different levels treated inhumanely. And so we had to begin to build our own basically self-help organizations. And so that song helped me to understand that I was good in my skin and who I was. And through that loving myself, I was able to love other people. And so yeah, that's my theme song.
Thanks, Reuben. Noel?
Yeah, thanks. Well, for me, I mean, this isn't necessarily a song that represents me per se, as much as it is like, my aunt chose to sing this at my ordination because my ministry has always been, had a lot to do with immigration. And so like the church that I was ordained in, the Good Shepherd UCC, has a Samaritan ministry. They go out and put water in the desert for migrants and do humanitarian aid. And so she sang this song "Deportee" by Woody Guthrie, originally written by him and popularized by Pete Seeger. And many of you might know, it's a story of 28 migrant farm workers in 1948 who died in a plane crash, and there were no names. And so part of the song is "All They Will Be Called is Deportees." And that history of exploitation of farm workers, of course, goes back to the beginning of this country and slavery. And farm workers, of course, were not included in the National Labor Relations Act. So they don't have the same rights as most workers do in this country. And, we see the same way now at our border, the way immigration is playing out. And definitely race and racism is a big part of this. And we're especially seeing how Black migrants are discriminated at the border, especially Haitians and Africans. And so this theme of utilizing the immigration system as a way to promote the white supremacist agenda, goes way far back beyond Woody Guthrie's song, but certainly something that still rings true.
Thank you all. What I'm going to ask you at the end of the session is, talk with your neighbor, so one-on-one, and not ask questions to each other, or try to, respond that this is what I've heard, but to think about, when I really was listening today to the panelists, what story came up in my mind? Okay, because I'm asking them also, the panel, to come up with their stories about when they hear my question, not necessarily to reply, but what story comes up when you hear me asking the question. So try to listen. All kinds of stories came up when I was listening to them, what was my story. So can we try to do that? Okay, we are trying to touch upon two themes. We're not going to solve major issues, but I hope that we are providing you with some extra stories and information and insights that you can put in your backpack, and when you continue your journey, after an hour, you will have access to some additional stories and information to deal with the problems that you might face within your own life or within your work, etc. Okay. Amena, you would like to start? The question that I'm asking you is, in light of the backlash against DEI programs, how can organizations reaffirm and strengthen their commitment to DEI principles?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that question. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is just honesty, like taking it way back and being honest about the downfalls or the shortcomings that are present in whatever program or system or culture that's going on. And that leads me to offer what I kind of want to center, what I want to talk about is accountability as a principle of not only DEI, but also it could just in our communities in general. I think accountability has to be chosen by folks. So I think there's really no such thing as like making someone accountable. Instead, I think it's creating a culture of accountability by holding space for folks to practice that. And I think this in turn leads to a culture of trust, the feeling of like trust and safety in a workplace or again, any other place comes from strong ties like from within that community or the people or like the group of people there in relationships. And so creating a culture of accountability and also just having having your needs met and like just prioritizing people as people. I think a lot of times DEI programs or principles and things center their focus around getting diverse folks in and getting their marginalized folks in, but like once they're in, we don't really talk about what comes next, right? So I think me personally, I've been in so many spaces and my work has ranged. I've worked at the International Rescue Community, the IRC, UNICEF, now BAJI, Boys and Girls Club, just in general, all these like places where we're serving other folks, right? And a lot of those folks look like me. And so I'm celebrated once I'm in, right? And I'm bringing this like diverse perspective or like I'm bringing something different to the table and I'm at the table. But once I'm there, I've a lot of actually all the times that I've been in these different spaces before, I'm either bullied out once I'm there for just speaking up for myself and for people who may look like me or and I'm a very direct and like just loud person in general. And I think that also comes with being a young person sometimes in space in rooms where or in just spaces where there are older people or things go by, seniority and things. And so I'm either bullied out or I'm exhausted and I'm burnt out and I end up leaving those spaces, even though those spaces are really dear to me. And I'm serving again people who, and especially young people, like people who I want to be there for, who I wish were there for me. And so I think at the end of the day, if the space or the institution or whatever it is, isn't really walking the talk, then no amount of DEI practices or principles or programs that are put in place are going to band-aid anything, right? So it's like really taking a step back and thinking about, okay, we have, we're celebrating and we have these folks coming in, but it's like, how are we taking care of each other? And I think even if um, that doesn't, I think a lot of people wait for maybe like a committee or people who are like in higher up positions to tell them like we need, doing this, that, and the other. But it's like bringing it back to the folks. I mean, I just wish I think back to my own experiences and I wish that the people that were my colleagues or on the same, we're on the same playing field or team. There was like the culture of kind of like having each other's back. And I think that would have really helped in these different situations where I felt like I was completely alone or I was like brought in and celebrated and things. And then afterwards, I'm just kind of like pushed to the curb. So yeah, that's what I have to offer.
Thanks, Amena. Reuben.
I think that for faith organizations and any organizations, what we really have to have and be ready for is to have hard conversations. I think many of us, we want to, especially in in faith organizations, we want to get along with everybody. We want to be able to work together. But there are certain topics that are hard for us, and one of them is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have to say, my wife is an incredible woman. She works for the organization People's Action, but she comes from a faith-based foundation. And so what she has begun to talk about is what's called an organizing revival. And for you to have, and she believes that to have this revival, we have for different organizations that deal with organizing people around different issues, you have to be able to get back to the root of, and that is to go out and to meet people. And organizing is talking to people one-on-one. It's meeting people and finding out what their issues are. And that means being intimate with people. It means listening to their stories and not, as you said earlier, Maurice, not being ready to ask questions and to come up with your solutions, but to be able to deeply listen to people and where they're at, and to hear their stories before you have any type of solution. And so for, as Amena just said, for her first year as the new executive director, being a woman of color from El Salvador, people were are just hyping her up. Oh, we have this woman of color that's open to organizations. But after she started to really talking about the stories and let them know these are the things that that people are hearing and speaking about, there began to be a backlash because people did not want to hear that stories. They wanted to still be caught up in their own, as you said, to hold on to their own duckies and to have their own stuff. And so to hear those stories and to begin to understand that if we're going to build a new house, we have to redesign it for everybody. Because I was just many of you may have heard the recent story about the Kansas City football kicker who was at the giving the speech, the commencement speech at university, Catholic University in Kansas. And as he began to talk, he began, as I again listened to your story, Maurice, he began to hold on to his own duck. And that duck was how women were supposed to act and how women are supposed to be, and how diversity and inclusion was basically being dictated to everyone. And I began to, as I began to hear his story, this is a man who has teammates who are African American, who the only reason Patrick Mahomes and Chris Jones and all those people are on his teammates is because people fought for diversity and inclusion for him to be now a Super Bowl champion. And if he hadn't had this type of diversity and inclusion, this team would not be where it was, and he would not be able to speak at this university. And that, for me, is the history of America. Without diversity and inclusion, it is not what it is. We would not be where we are. We would not be able to sit in the same room as this. I would not be able to talk to you about my story. And so it's so important, because without that history of diversity and inclusion and fighting for space and fighting for the places that we are now in, we would not be here where we are, and we would not be able to even imagine a new America. And so I hope I answered the question or came close. Blessings.
Thanks, Reuben. I really think you touch upon a very important part, and that is, know your history, right? And make that part of your journey. Understand how things have evolved and how they develop. Very important. No, Noel.
Yeah, well, for us, we started a community organizing program at Church World Service focused on the, part of our constituent base, which is mainly refugees, but it does include, immigrants across statuses. And, for us, it was very important that, because the work, as mentioned, that this work should be represented by people who are coming from the demographic, we're hiring predominantly people with a refugee and immigrant background as organizers. And I think it makes such a huge difference in the work. One example that came to mind was in Columbus, Ohio. We hired Jackie Kafuko, who comes from a Ugandan background, and she was able to connect with leaders also from that background. And so Deborah Jane, who was a victim of an acid attack in her home country, also ended up mostly in Uganda, but she was very scared to tell her story at first, which I think, there's a lot of fear about, getting out there in the public and actually telling your story, mobilizing people. And she was motivated to reunify with her family. So she started telling her story, came to DC with us and press conferences, and eventually was highlighted in the Netflix series Immigration Nation. And First Community Church, which is a DOC UCC church, really supported Deborah Jane in the reunification of her 4 children and sponsored them, and they were able to be reunited. So, that's a success story, but through all of these types of stories, there's a lot of difficult conversations that do happen. A lot of times, faith community, especially predominantly white faith communities, can be a bit pejorative, or can do things that could be considered microaggressions, or sometimes just plain discrimination. And so, working with that church and working with the people who are impacted, because we don't want to put people who are impacted in more harm's way. And so really doing the educational work, and in this case, I'm thinking more of a lot of the sanctuary congregations I worked with, where, marginalized people facing deportation, are living inside sanctuary congregation. And so you can imagine the different issues that come up around that, and the importance of people learning how to check their privilege. So there's a lot more I could say about that, but I'll stop there.
Okay. Thanks, Noel. Jose?
Yeah, I want just to acknowledge the great comments that came before my response. And I would just say, I think I can add that I've been very fortunate. I lived in Wichita, Kansas, went to Wichita State University, worked for a predominantly white organization, moved to Atlanta, which is my home city and state, and then now live in Chicago, Illinois. When we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would add this. I agree with each and everything the panel has shared thus far. And I'm going to push us just a little bit, because I think that as I look into space, I can tell you this, that, you can have all of the trainings in the world. And I love, Maurice, how you mentioned, I love your analogy with the duckies, right? At the end of the day, individuals are going to have to be willing to give up something to bring other people in. And so as I look around the room, if we're not willing to give up something to bring other folks in, then what we have is a lot of conversation. And so when we think about the immigrant population, when I think about men and women of color who I've dealt with, and I've been in the rooms, I've been in spaces, I've been with CEOs from all over the country and interact with people from all over the world. And the most difficult thing to do is for people to give up that thing that would really, really, really bring to life what it really means to actualize inclusion. We're not including nobody until we're willing to give up something. And so I would not call out this organization, but I would share an experience. So in my younger days, when I was in my 20s, I'm recently graduated from Wichita State. Reuben, I still had my form. I still had my body. I was in pretty good shape. But I'm a big black brother. I don't know if y'all can tell on the screen, but I'm big. And so I'm dark skinned. And so I already know my skin is weaponized. And I choose to, hey, Reuben, I'm glad I still have some hair on my head. You know, so I truth, no shade, Rube, no shade, Rube. You know, and so what happens is,
Discriminating.
you know, microaggressions. And so, and what happens is, though, when I walk into a space, I know I have to smile. Although I may not feel like smiling, because it disarms people who are not just people who may not be Black. The research is very clear that all the systemic issues that people think about us as negative, we feel about ourselves. And so this experience I had really, and I'm going to wrap it up. I was young, and I'm reading Before the Mayflower. Some of y'all read those books. I'm reading Dr. Juwanza Kunjufu's book. He's from Chicago. You know, Counter Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. And I'm lit up. My mind is just, I'm woke, big time. And I go to a person, and you know, he's irritated with me, and he says this. He's from the so-called majority culture. He's, well, Jose, y'all can't beat us. Y'all can't win. And so I sat back and said, dang. And I thought about it, I said, yep, he's right. Unless we're willing to really sacrifice and do some extraordinary things to force the tides to turn. And I share that because as I close out, when you think about diversity, equity, inclusion, those who are sitting around the table, man, this is not a program. This is a lifestyle. This is what you become. This is what you do. You sacrifice. That means that you're gonna hurt somebody. I mean, we're talking your family. We gotta give stuff up in order to bring people around the table and be willing to be advocates for those individuals who are suffering. We are challenged to be advocates for those who are suffering. I think that's how we begin to move the needle when it comes to diverse inclusion throughout our country.
Thanks, Jose. I really have to apologize because I'm pushing us through a lot of topics. I need to jump to the next thing. Let's think about the WTL for a moment. Yeah, I would like to go with you to the role of faith leaders in bridging divide. So Reuben, I would like to start with you. Why is it crucial for faith leaders to address narratives that put marginalized communities against each other, and particularly in the context of migrants and native residents?
Hope I can do this quickly. I was pastoring a church, New Day Christian Church. We had grown from 7 members to 750 in just a few years. It was pretty diverse church. One of the things that happened was a Latino pastor came and asked me if he could use some space in our church. And I said, oh, sure. We have a back room here. It's a huge space. You can, basically you can take it and you can use it for free. And this was just who I was. I said, because I know you're trying to grow your congregation. And so we had a great rapport, he and I and his family. So they took over the back church. But what I didn't expect quickly was that even though our church was pretty diverse, it was still mostly African-American church. And I did not expect the backlash that I was going to receive from many of my members of the church who said, why are you doing this and letting them come here free and and they were really, really upset with me. And I was saying, because that's how we grew. Someone helped us. And the only way we were, and this church also, it's of the faith of Christianity. We're supposed to help those. And so that was what my belief was. And so they came in the church and they really, everything they did helped expand our understanding of our community, people who were coming to the community. And so one morning I came to the church, and standing on the porch of the church was the grandmother, and 2 children. And they told me that ICE had come and raided their house and deported the pastor, the father, the son, and another member of the church. And the only place they had to go and this is before I ever knew about sanctuary churches. The only place they had to go was the church, and they were standing there, and they said, told me, Pastor, we don't trust anybody else. We don't trust, and so this was the church, and I believe this is what the church was supposed to be doing. And so they basically lived in our space for about 7 months before we found them more help, and found housing for them, and actually worked with organizations to help bring back the father and the other members of that family. And so when I began to work with that family, I also started to work with an organization called Sunflower Community Action. And that organization was working on issues around immigration. And one of the things around immigration that was happening at that time was around driver's license. And at that time, there was a big thing about show me your papers. In the Black community, we also were being asked to show our papers. Many of our young Black and brown Black men were being pulled over by the police when they were going to their jobs, to school. And what's happened, they got their driver's license taken away from them. Then they began to have felony charges because they missed court dates. And then they had huge fines. In one meeting, we found out that the average fine was $1,500 for these families. And so what that did was put a tax on our community, and it took resources out of the community. Same thing was happening in the Black and brown community. We began to put together we found out as we began to talk with people about getting their driver's license back, the young people were saying these people were saying, well, we don't have jobs. And so we found out all these different issues that were impacting both communities. And we were saying no one was addressing those issues. And we found out many of the people that were in the Black and brown community, they all had one thing in common. And that was most of them had grown up in a faith community, and that they believed that God was with them. They believed that Jesus and that purpose had a purpose for their lives. And so we were able to begin to use faith leaders to come in and to talk to the group. And it became a source of strength. And we brought folks together, and we won on issues. We won issues around show your papers. We won issues around, we beat and knocked out a politician that was very racist. We were able to do things in a community that basically was a mostly a white community, but we found that there were more white progressives who were in the community who thought also the same way. And we brought those groups, communities together, and that was through faith. If it had not been for a trust and belief in something larger than ourselves, we would have not been able to come together. And so that is the story where I have always been, is that if we don't educate, and we had to educate folks around issues around race, historical boundaries and historical oppression that happened in the Black community, that also helped as we began to work on those issues, but helped every community. And without those stories, because it wasn't just that Latinos who were coming into the community or Asians who were coming into the community had issues around race. There were African people who were coming into the community who also didn't want to deal with what we call Black Americans, because they had a stereotype about them, and we had a stereotype about African people. And if it had not been for the church and faith organizations coming together to talk about those issues, we wouldn't have been able to win the battles that we did.
Thanks, Reuben. Thanks for sharing that. José?
Yeah, I think I just want to echo what Reverend Reuben talked about, just that the whole process. What he did was he observed, listened, and he acted. He responded. And I think that faith leaders have a responsibility. And the reality is, if we are living the faith, then there's these issues and solutions. These issues will be resolved because men and women of faith will be taking action. So in Chicago, for example, since August of 2022, we've had now it's about 40,000, asylum seekers coming to Chicago. If you can imagine that number, and we're talking literally having busloads of individuals coming, they're arriving on buses, they're arriving on planes, they're arriving on trains. And so, it's created this issue within the community because from the perspective of those who live here, we're like, man, how in the world are they receiving these benefits? And we got Black men and women here who have been struggling with housing, but yet they're getting housing, struggling with food, and yet they're getting food. And so what faith leaders have done here, and I'm going to identify one in particular at my church. So I am an elder at the Shiloh Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so my pastor, when we saw this, we went to one of the, I'm going to call it a holding facility. It's really a school that was transformed into a shelter for, if you can imagine, 900 people. And so 80% men, 20% women in the space, no children, no families. And so we got a chance to go to that location and begin to interact. We pressed in, we listened, we wanted to know what the needs really were. And so one of the things that we've done since that time is actually created a second service. Shiloh's church is 100% is historic, is 114 years old, historic African-American church in Chicago on the South Side. And it's now, for the first time, we have a second service just for those individuals who are not just those immigrants, but also those who speak Spanish as their first language. And so it is critical that ministers, take the challenge and the calling to move as God has moved on their hearts. When I listen to Reuben, I think about other pastors in the Chicagoland area who are not just sitting by, doing nothing. They are actually, we've made very, very, very certain that those individuals who are coming to the city can eat. Now, although the city has different programs for them, most of them were housed in police stations throughout the city of Chicago. And that was just a whole nother different scenario by itself. And so if you can imagine, and I had a video, I won't show it to you right now because of time, but if you can just imagine having a police department, I'm not sure what your police department looked like in your neighborhoods, but imagine going to your police department, your police stations, and there are tents. Now that location becomes a tent city. And imagine that police station really only has probably one or two public restrooms. Now you got hundreds of people, male, ladies, children, babies, using these one washroom. You can imagine the sanitary condition that was created. And so what we done and what other churches, what other ministers have done, from Catholic to Seventh-day Adventist to AME churches, they have come together and began to work to make sure those individuals have those their needs met. So I think that's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for us to live our mission. And I'll leave it right there.
Okay, thanks, Jose. Noel?
Great. Yeah. So for me, I'm thinking of, my experience in Alabama in 2012, working against the House Bill 56, which was, I'd also worked against the Arizona Senate Bill 1070 bill. So that was a similar sort of show me your papers type of anti-immigrant bill, but this one also had the voter ID laws in it as well. So there was a lot of attempt to suppress voters in the HB 56, and so you really saw the African American faith communities really stepping up to speak out against HB 56. A lot of unions and, of course, a lot of sort of Latinx immigrants' rights groups were all joining together. And we launched the campaign against that bill in the 16th Street Church in Birmingham, and ended up doing another march, first time they had done a march in a long time, from Montgomery or from Selma to Montgomery. And so John Lewis came out, and Jesse Jackson, and but there was one organizer there who's also a UCC pastor. Her name was Reverend Angie Wright, and she had started a church long before that I think was also kind of paving the way to this type of solidarity, because she, many have complained, right? The Sunday morning is the most segregated time of the week. And so she started a church in Birmingham called the Beloved Community Church. And the goal of the church was to have more of an integrated, that time it was predominantly African American and white, but with their involvement against HB 56, you saw growing Latinx groups coming in as well. And so, I think that was an important moment in the South where we saw groups coming together. Now, of course, we're seeing this SB4 in Texas and the growing anti-immigrant laws that criminalize people for their status growing again. And so, the HB 56 was eventually struck down and really, I think, set the scene for the immigrants' rights movement in that moment. And it's hard for us to recognize that we continue to find ourselves in these moments where the type of racist policies, now we see Abbott busing migrants. And we could have another conversation about Chicago and other places about how the resource scarcity is drawing these tensions. And really, I believe that our policies are part of the issue here, that we need to be doing a lot more in our policies for Black communities and have an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset. But there's a lot more to say about all of that.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Amena?
Yeah, I'll just really quickly add, because I know the time, but I'm gonna push for, so I actually am not part of the church community. I grew up Muslim, but however, in being in Wichita and growing up here, I've been very involved with our church community here because of the interfaith things that have happened in Wichita and the things that have happened because of being able to come together. And so when I worked at the IRC with again refugee young refugee kids in the high school system, and I was actually brought on because of the fact that there was kids weren't graduating for really silly reasons, and I'm not going to go into the education system and things like that, but kids weren't graduating, didn't feel like they fit in, they were dropping out, et cetera, et cetera. And so we were able, through organizing with my own community, but also the other church communities in here, in Wichita, we were able to and this was back in 2019 or 2018, because of that mobilization between our interfaith communities in general, we've been able to, there's been a solid summer programming that has happened for those kids, and we've seen numbers go up in graduation for kids graduating from high school and pursuing whatever else they want to pursue afterwards. And it was because of that because of that interfaith organizing. So that's one thing I'll urge for our faith leaders, but also Reverend Andersen said as well, just moving past this neoliberal tradition of looking out for ourselves and this scarcity mindset that feels so urgent, oh no, we're not going to make it. The only way we're going to make it is if we go after each other, and so but rather seeing ourselves and our health and our faiths as all of these things are intertwined, and so we're going to bridge divides and fight back, and we're going to fight back together. So that's all what I'll offer.
Thank you, Amena. I'd like to ask you permission to continue for 5 minutes longer than, is that okay? Okay. So the next part, what I'm going to ask you to do is find a partner and take 30 seconds to kind of, what did I hear so far? And then each of you will share for 2 minutes what came up. You could be, this is what I've heard that I would like to share with you. Or this is a story that came up after listening to all those other stories. Okay? So we will do that. So that's That's 5 minutes, right? 30 seconds centering, 2 minutes telling the story, 2 minutes back. And then I will ask maybe two of you to share it to the plenary. Okay? Can you find a part? Okay. I know we can continue talking, that's a good thing. I don't have a point, so I would like to have maybe 2 volunteers to share their story. Again, in a minute. Who would like to go? You would like to go? Yeah. Yeah.
I guess, what, the fact that we need to give up something, everybody needs to give up something, and, being an African American congregation and predominantly white region church, that we say one thing, we claim what we say in word on piece of paper is we have very, very serious problems in translating that and affirming that outside paper for the people come in. One of the things that I noticed is that insight was that being a predominantly African American congregation and a white denomination does not necessarily mean that there has to be black education, that you can still support that community. That community, and people have a problem with that. That if you come in and then they do not reconcile the fact that you come in, but you got to do things like you do it, and then then you don't respect where you come from. So we haven't figured out how partnership works yet. We don't do that. And how we just don't do we too good. And what God calls us to, I believe, is that piece that we need to support the African American community. You don't have to. Black churches don't. Black folks don't have to join white churches, and white churches, white folks don't have to join black. But we can support the African American churches, communities that are present, and so that we all had to give up something, and then that as an African American congregation, well, they coming in, those other people coming in, and they taking my job. That's why I can't get my money. And the people, because they have the same needs that we have, and trying to allow people to see that we have those same needs, and as Christians, we are called to meet them.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Solidarity, empathy, listening, continuous listening, creating space for each other. Who would like to go? 1 minute.
I learned that it was re-emphasized that even when we know we need to do the right thing, when we want to be inclusive, the structures that we find ourselves in don't allow us to be. Okay, so the example was, if someone is Muslim and they want to pray 5 times a day, where are they going to do that? Okay. And is it a broom closet? Because that's the only quiet place in the building. I know that we had that same question at our church. We had an interfaith gathering. They wanted to pray at dusk. We couldn't find a room that didn't have a cross in it. And we led them to the bathroom. I mean, it's a big bathroom, yeah, but and that was just that, that was really wrong. And so you just have to think like ahead of time and see what structures you have and try to, but you have to really work to rearrange the structures.
Thank you. I would like to give the last word to our panelists. So, the question, well, the question that I asked, any message, question, or invitation for the audience? Unfortunately, you only have 30 seconds per person. So, who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay, Jose.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity. Great being here. I think the example that we are challenged to use that of Christ when it comes to dealing with immigrants, of which he was one. And that is he mingled with people as one who sought their good. And he asked then for them to follow them. So I think regardless if we're Muslim or Christian, I think the challenge we have is to really press in, get to know people, and ask ourselves personal question, because it's going to come to this at some point. What are we willing to give up in order to be inclusive? So those that we're serving, have as equal as an opportunity at the table as all.
Amen. Thanks, Jose.
So I was a ministerial president and ministerial league president in Wichita, Kansas. I was asked to go to a group that was called the American Ministerial League. The Ministerial League that I was part of was mostly African American, but it was pretty diverse. I was asked to go to the American Ministerial League, and it was all white. I go into the room. We're in the room, and they greet me. We were having a great conversation, and then they went into this session and they began to talk about how the evils of Islam. I immediately just recoiled. I was like, oh man, what did I do in this situation? So the Reuben and me, I had to stand up and say, this is crazy. There's no way I can sit in this stuff. And I began to talk, about our faith, our connection in our faith. And I said, I got to leave. And as I began to leave, and next thing I know, I didn't think anybody else was going to leave that room. But as I left the room, there were 3 other white pastors who left also with me. So we have to also understand that as we believe really in diversity and equity and inclusion and in our faith, that sometimes we have to stand in places that will leave us by ourselves, or we think by ourselves. But I always believe in that quote that there are more with us than are against us if we begin to stand up for what we believe and what is true and what is right. And that means also redirecting every institution and rebuilding it, because our Constitution, as we know, was framed by certain framers. But what would have happened if there were women in that room? What would have happened if there were gay people in that room? What would happen if there were Black people and brown people in that room? It wouldn't be the same Constitution. We wouldn't have the same house or the same order. It'd be different.
Thanks, Reuben.
I can go ahead. Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think the terrible conditions that we as a collective live through that shackle us are bound through our collective suffering. So they're put in place and they want us to suffer, but also as is our struggle for liberation and joy and freedom and all the things that any person would want. So I really urge, and that's also bound through our collective, not suffering, but our collective joy, our collective freedom, things like that. So I really hope that folks tap into collective care and community care for one another. And thank you for having me here. It's been very lovely.
Thanks, Amin. No.
Yeah, this has been such a rich conversation. I'm so glad to have been part of this. And thank you to all the other panelists for your incredible stories and wisdom. And I'll just name a few things. One is, we're fighting for the Haitian TPS, temporary protected status, and put the UCC action alert you can find there. Was just at a press conference for that in DC, and there's so many great leaders, a lot of Black women leaders, and a lot of folk from the Congressional Black Caucus very involved in that. There's also, the voting, and the UCC has the Our Faith, Our Vote, but I know others have a lot of CWS is working on the new immigrant vote, and I would encourage everybody to help get out the vote, and also think about what we call the sort of low proficient voters, people who haven't been given the same access and resources to be able to vote. And really, I think everyone should be involved in that. Lastly, a friend of mine from Detention Watch Network, Silky Shah, just came out with a book. I haven't read it yet. I want to. It's called Unbuild Walls. And it has to do with the overlap between the immigration detention system and the mass incarceration system, and looking at immigration enforcement through an abolitionist lens. So I think there's a lot more to be said around that particular discussion. Do we need prisons? Do we need detention the way that we traditionally have thought about them? So yeah, just thank you again to all the participants and panelists. It's been incredible to be with you all.
Thank you all so much. Thank you as well. I mean, this is really incredible. Church World Service. I mean, Reuben was supposed to be in this room, and yeah, things have happened why he couldn't, so we had to shake it around. So happy that we were able to pull this off through a screen. I hope you enjoyed it as well. I talked with them. If you would like to reach out to them with questions or have conversations, I can give you my email number, and then I will be able to pass it on. Yeah, thank you so much. And I will try. We have recorded this. I don't know if we will make minutes for a blog or something. But I think it has a lot of richness, and yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.